Welcome to the podcast, Jess and Candace. It's a delight to have you here. I've only done a couple of podcast episodes where we've had two guests, so this is always more fun to have a
Yay.
couple of voices together. So we'll be talking a lot about hormones today, and it's really interesting because we have a mom and a daughter here, and we'll be talking about hormonal health for, more just like your age group, your population, and then more like Candace. I'm probably kind of in the middle, closer probably to Candace's age, but kind of right in the
No,
middle of both of you.
no.
So we'll be talking about like if you're still in menstruating years versus perimenopause versus menopause and kind of what to expect because it's not talked about a lot. I know my generation is just starting to be that way where we are starting to figure out how our bodies even work. And here I am. I'll be 48 in a couple of weeks. Actually, I'll have just turned 48 by the time this podcast airs. But I know way more about my hormones since in my 40s than I ever did before. I didn't know probably even a quarter of what I know now before I had kids, which I think is an absolute tragedy. So we're here today to talk about all of that. So go ahead and introduce yourselves little bit about your backstory and how you got so interested in this. I am maybe hoping my daughter is studying special education, so I don't think she's going to be working with me anytime soon, but I think it'd be so cool if someday she would. So we
Yeah.
can start with you, Jess.
Okay. Well, I'm Jess, and well, first of all, thanks so much for having us. We love podcasting together. It's really fun. And I enjoy your podcast. You share great information. I've learned a lot about insulin resistance. And I am a holistic health coach. I have a 12-year history of yo-yo dieting, kind of going through the binge restrict cycle that I feel like a lot of women can relate to. I was always either on a diet or off a diet. And it really stemmed from long story short, it stemmed from putting on a lot of weight at the end of high school after I had been really active in sports and didn't really have to think about my weight. And all of a sudden it felt like I ballooned up overnight. And it put me on this trajectory of, oh my gosh, you're about to go into college. You need to lose weight. Otherwise, no boys are going to like you. You're going to be hazed. You're not going to have friends. And so I started taking diet pills, and that progressed to, at the time it was like South Beach diet and Atkins and all these different diet books, and just really desperate to get the weight off. But being that young and going into college, obviously you want to have the college experience, you want to connect with your friends. And so I would be on these diets, but then as soon as my friends wanted to go out, I would be like binge drinking and eating late night food. And I proceeded to lose and gain 45 pounds multiple times. So it would be like lose 20 pounds, be up 10, lose 30 pounds, be up 15. I could never sustain it. And I just never thought that I would be able to. And it wasn't until I turned about 30 and I was going through some health issues. I was suffering debilitating migraines because I was in this extremely stressful marketing job. I had very low energy. I wasn't even thinking about the fact that in order to even survive in the day, I needed like 3 to 4 cups of coffee first thing in the morning. Um, I was, again, I was doing like 6 days of HIIT training a week and dieting during the week and then off on the weekends. And I just hit this breaking point and I realized I'm always tired. I had these horrible headaches. I was nauseous a lot. I was on the hormonal birth control, but I hadn't had a real period in like 4 years. And so I sort of just had this epiphany where I needed to channel my mom. My mom will speak to her experience, but she's been a health educator for over 30 years. And at the time, she was working for ZRT, which is a hormone testing lab. And, I just said, Mom, I need your help. I want to come off of hormonal birth control. Finally, I need to get to the root of these hormonal imbalances. So we tested my hormone levels in saliva, which is what we currently offer our clients, uncovered estrogen dominance and adrenal issues and high cortisol. And so we really worked to rebalance my hormones through nutrition changes, jumping off the yo-yo diet cycle, smart supplementation, bioidentical hormones, and I got my period back. I got my energy back. I started to be able to maintain my weight loss. And I just, similar to you, Shanna, I've heard you speak about your story that I had to help other women do the same thing. And I feel like a lot of us in this industry get to that point. And so I went to school to become a health coach and started coaching clients and have been doing that for the last 7 years. And then joined forces with my mom, who at the same time that I was graduating from school was going off on her own to start her own consulting practice, testing women's hormones and working with them to rebalance. And then eventually my sister came on board to help us grow the business. She's now the CEO. My mom's the co-founder, and I'm our in-house holistic health coach.
That's amazing. I love that you're all together and joining forces. That's great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. And as I listened to that, like, so I mentioned before we started recording, my daughter is 20 at the time of this recording, and she's just to the point where everything that I've kind of taught her and modeled in our home over the years, she's still in college, but she's like, Mom, thank you so much for, for teaching me how my body works. And she has had PCOS, and we're just finally getting that all reversed. Much like you, high cortisol levels, acne.
Mhm.
I mean, she just kind of burns herself out, and just starting to get to the point where it's making sense to her. So
That's
I'm sure,
great.
Candace, you are a huge inspiration to your daughter. So let's hear how you got into all of this. And your focus, I would imagine, is more on like older women, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Women like me, the original baby boomers, who all are in our late 60s, 70s, where the whole issue of hormone replenishment or replacement is so fraught because, older women are sort of definitely the ones that everybody's saying, no, you just, go gently into that good night and don't worry too much about using hormones because you're already too old. But I fight on that one because I find, having had Jess when I was 37 years old, the age she is now, being an older mom, it's been pretty pivotal to have maintain balance in my life, for the most part, health and energy, despite even a bout of cancer, and still here and being able to do the work we're doing now. And I have to credit Jess and Ryan for opening up the minds, helping to spread awareness among the women their age. Because yes, I have been working with menopausal women for the not so much just men. I wasn't consulting with women in my job at ZRT as a director of education. I was communicating and educating, and I got that job because around your age, you said you're 48. I had two daughters, and Jess was maybe 7, and my other one was 4, or however old Brian was. I had her when I was 41. And they were both looking at me like the monster had just, the witch of the West had just invaded and I was being that way. My mood swings and my hot flashes were making me crazy. I was probably drinking way too much coffee. I just remember screaming at people and the girls, and in the middle of winter having a hot flash and opening all the doors and they're all freezing. So the whole story, and they have horror stories of my behavior in restaurants, I believe, or at least
Yeah.
one or two.
Major
But
meltdowns.
I got into it around the age of 48. I was already a health educator for many years, focused on all the myriad of how do we stay healthy and well and prevent disease? I mean, prevention is the cure for everything, isn't it? But when my mood swings and terrifying my children and creating turmoil in my family and not sleeping because of hot flashes and night sweats really took hold, I thought, okay, I get it. I need to start focusing on what are the health education issues for women of a certain age. And we know now this age is younger and younger. It might have started for me at 48, but many women that we test are, depending often on how abundant stress is running the show in their life. That really is just it's out of hand. So, and it's a direct link to insulin resistance and all of the inflammation and worry that we have. But it was my girls and my behavior that made me realize that I needed to focus on this. And even then, that was 25 years ago or more. So there were even fewer people talking about it. But luckily, I was doing my reading and research because that was my background. And I had also been a journalist. So in England, where I am speaking from now, leading a multiple life, um, I reached out to one of the authors of a book that's really important for women to read called What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Menopause. It's really the foundation of this whole argument that we have hormonal imbalances and how hormones work in the body. It's a primer for this conversation. Dr. John Lee, he studied with an English doctor here in Britain in the 50s who was using natural progesterone with women who were having violent outbursts, women with terrible postpartum depression. In fact, she had always had migraines, and when she was pregnant, she never had one the whole time she was pregnant. Her name was Katerina Dalton. So she started doing research into how could that be that during her pregnancy, she never had a migraine. And she was the person that coined the term premenstrual syndrome, the first person to publish on it in the British Medical Journal. So anyway, he had come over to England and studied with Katerina Dalton, came back to the States and switched his whole practice around to treating women in menopause with, natural remedies, vitamins, lifestyle changes, stress reduction, and plant-based hormones as needed. And never had another case of breast cancer in his practice. And he practiced in Mill Valley, California, where they had the highest breast cancer rate in the country.
Wow.
So that's who I called, and he directed me most propitiously to a biochemist, cancer research scientist who had opened a hormone testing lab in Portland, Oregon. And I was living right near there. And he said, go talk to Dr. David Zava. And so within a day, I had a job as the director of education because this guy was a scientist. And so that's where I really got my background in work in focusing as a health educator solely on hormones, hormone testing, hormone rebalancing. And I had the pleasure and privilege of working with all the thought leaders because this was back in I started with him in the early 2000s. That was the explosion of functional medicine, integrative medicine, bioidentical hormones, the study that came out, the Women's Health Initiative. So, lots of conferences, lots of pharmacists, functional meds I've had the pleasure of being mentored by and working with. And it's kind of a unique learning that I bring to this process. And when I was in ZRT, as a director, I found myself in a lot of meetings and doing a lot of, higher up kinds of decision-making things, which is great to help grow a business, but not if you want to talk to the women that you're helping. And I felt like I wasn't able to talk to women like me, one-on-one. And that's been the beauty of the creation of Your Hormone Balance. And to have my daughters in this with me, opening up the conversation to their age group, I can tell you the awareness has just exploded since I first got into this. So that's my story.
Yeah.
So
And that awareness piece, I mean, that's just critical. You can do, so you have to be careful with some of the information that you hear, but I know I was traditionally trained as a dietitian, and I basically relearned everything that I teach now with conferences and Instagram accounts and podcasts, and just like you said, like those early thought leaders and following what they suggest, not only on me, but like small groups of people first, and then seeing how transformative it can be. We're in a really great age right now that we can really find a lot of great information and practitioners and people that can help us for
And there's
pretty
good
much
research
anything.
out there. There's really
Yeah.
there's much more research now than there was when I first was in this, and even just studies. You talk a lot about insulin resistance, and there are studies that are out there about the positive correlation of stress with insulin resistance and blood. We know this, it's a very obvious point, but the point also is, are you looking at your stress hormones? Are you testing for those cortisols, and what's your pattern like, and how are you understanding that? We talk about cycle syncing and so many things, but the cortisol cycle itself, this cortisol rhythm and the relationship
Mhm.
between inflammation is crucial. And that's, a missing piece for women if they're not getting, when you see it in black and white on a page and you see that this is matching up with my hormones and how I feel and why I'm not sleeping, it really becomes a larger conversation about growing old well and
Yeah.
healthily. And
Yeah, you just
looking
need to know
good.
where to find the studies, right? And hope that they're not
Yeah,
buried from the
they're out there. There's no
public. Like you just have to know where to get them and how to access them. And
PubMed.
unfortunately, a lot of times the ones that you really want to see and are really helpful are kind of shoved under the rug because there's,
You,
no one.
before someone should shut me up, but before I forget, I wanted to say in the comment field of the test report that we use, and we use the hormone test from the lab that I worked for all those years, Dr. Zava created a comment field. So there is an interpretation of the results for the geeks out there who really want to learn. It's all there, and and the studies are in there. Not all of them,
Yeah.
but he puts the studies in. So just to reassure people, there are studies. They do exist. Yes, learn how to use PubMed. It's quite fun.
Yeah, yeah. I actually work with DRT. Like that's a lot where a
Good.
lot of my students order their testing
Oh,
home kits,
lovely.
so they send them right to their home. Yes. Um,
Amazing.
yeah. Well, Jess, I'd like to start with the topic of fertility, um, because it's becoming more and more of a problem with women who are still menstruating and running into fertility problems. And there's so much that goes behind this, but a lot of times our hormones are out of balance. We know it, we're either not getting our period, we're getting our period too often. We have all kinds of nasty symptoms going on. It's not regular. We're not ovulating, whatever it is, but we go to our OBGYN and more often than not, we're just told to go to a fertility clinic or, you know, sorry, like this is just how it is for you. So I know you had your own experience with with your period being gone for quite some time, and you did a lot of things to bring that back. So what do you think are the primary causes of infertility? And for those listening, or again, like the mothers of those listening who are maybe having some issues with fertility, and this is a huge topic. But what do you think are the main causes? And then how can somebody start to take some steps to start to bring those natural rhythms and hormones back into balance?
Definitely. I think, especially at my age, I'm late 30s now. Um, there's so many women that I speak to that have struggled with infertility. I've had friends that are really close to me struggle, friends that have had multiple miscarriages. We had a friend of ours speak on my podcast about her really long journey with infertility, and she has a healthy baby now, which is so exciting. But yeah, I think a lot of women place blame on themselves, like they're doing something wrong or they waited too late or, whatever it is. And I think unfortunately that is some of the message that's out there. And I think it's important to open up the dialogue, which is why we had someone on our podcast to share about it, because women can feel very alone and isolated in that journey. And, we're told not to share our news of pregnancy until we get past the first trimester too, which I understand that, but that can also be very lonely. I have several friends and a client who are currently pregnant and they've told me, but they haven't told their families. And they're just like, I don't want to like jinx it, and, but they're stressed about it and they're anxious and they're like, I'm just waiting to that second trimester. I'm just waiting. And unfortunately, stress is a root of fertility struggles. In fact, the woman that we had on our podcast, she had been through multiple rounds of IVF, and it was becoming very hard on her body and their relationship. And they eventually, after trying for a really long time, decided to take a break from the treatments because they just couldn't handle it. And in that break, she got pregnant naturally. And
Oh,
that was
God.
so interesting because it's like she released a lot of that stress and pressure during that time. And so I'm not saying that's exactly why, but it's interesting to hear because stress does play a huge role. when we are in our reproductive years, we have these 4 unique phases of the menstrual cycle. We have our menstrual phase, we have, which is the bleed week. We have the follicular phase, which starts when the menstrual phase ends, and that's when we get estrogen and testosterone starting to rise. Follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, is starting to rise to help those follicles mature. And then we have ovulation, which is the main event of the menstrual cycle. It's really the purpose of the menstrual cycle. And this is the only phase where we can actually get pregnant, contrary to popular belief in schools. Meaning, when we're younger, we're often told like, oh, you can just get pregnant any day of the week or any day of the month. And that's not true. There's the 1 day of ovulation where we release an egg to potentially get fertilized by sperm, and then up to 5 days that sperm can survive inside of us via this peak cervical fluid that we produce. And then we go into the luteal phase, which is the longest and the 4th and final phase. And the luteal phase is really important because it is only upon ovulation that we produce progesterone. And so if we are not ovulating regularly, then we're not producing enough progesterone. And progesterone is the hormone that helps us to get pregnant and bring that pregnancy to term. And so oftentimes, women will get pregnant, and then unfortunately they'll have a miscarriage. And oftentimes that can be related back to not producing enough progesterone, not ovulating regularly enough. And ovulation is our bodies as females, we're extremely sensitive to the stimulus around us. Our body is always trying to have our back. It's trying to protect us from famine or from stress or anything that could potentially disrupt our ability to give birth. So if the body perceives something as a stressor, it's going to downregulate unnecessary processes, and reproduction is considered like an unnecessary process when we're in fight or flight. Back in the day, it was like we're running for our lives from, I don't know, everyone uses the example of a bear, but like I was trying to think of something more unique. But yeah, we're running for our lives, or we have no idea where the next meal is going to come from. That's real stress.
Yeah.
But now in our modern day society, our body doesn't know the difference between that real imminent stress and us checking Instagram and not getting enough likes on a post, or I think we're just very hypersensitive to stress, and the body perceives it the same way. And so some of the major stressors that I see a lot of women dealing with is the restrictive diets, like the yo-yo dieting specifically, which is what I did for so many years. And I truly believe that's what made it so hard for me to regain a natural cycle. Because when you're eating such low calories, like I was eating 1,200 calories for like a year, which is crazy. I don't even know how I did that, but I was binging in between. The body starts to downregulate certain hormones like the thyroid, and it says like we're in this stressed out state. We're in famine. We don't know when we're going to get food again for this potential fetus. So let's downregulate these hormones. Let's, make it impossible to reproduce. And so it's those really low calorie diets that aren't high in enough essential fatty acids and protein. That's a stress on the body. Also using toxic products. So like the lotions that we rub on our body, the makeup, the household cleaners that we're using, that's a stress on the body. Going too long between meals and not having meals that are blood sugar balancing, that's a stress on the body. Too much high intensity exercise, too much cardio, and not enough strength training. And these were all things that I was doing at the same time. And it's very, very common, especially for women, really at all ages. But I would say, the younger reproductive years, I think there is a lot of pressure and stress on us to look a certain way and be a certain way. And so we're in the midst of trying to grow our careers and get ahead. And there is just so much stress and pressure. And unfortunately, that can lead us to not ovulate and to not produce enough progesterone. And that combination is really tough for getting and staying pregnant. And then we add in the mix things like prescription drugs, hormonal birth control, that suppress your natural hormones. And it's kind of like this recipe for disaster, but there's certainly things that you can do to improve your fertility. I don't like to say infertility. I would say like fertility struggles, because I think infertility sounds really final, and it's not.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Great.
And then going back to the hormonal birth control, we have talked a little bit about that on the podcast. And of course, we always say, like, this is primarily for education. We're not casting judgment on anybody. And, I know, like, my daughter I think we went in for her 14-year-old well check, and she hadn't had her first period yet, which in this day and age is pretty uncommon. And they said, well, if she doesn't get it by the time she's 15, we'll just put her on birth control. I'm like, no, you won't. Like, why would we put her on birth control?
Good
She
mom.
hasn't even had a first period yet. Like, it's crazy.
Crazy.
And then my son's girlfriend was struggling with some acne, and same thing, like my daughter struggled with acne because of the PCOS and the high androgens. And my son's girlfriend was having some issues with acne. And that's the first thing, like, let's put you on birth control. Let's just suppress those hormones. And I think I read somewhere it's like 18 to 24 months of regular menstrual cycles before your body is really in sync and the hormones are syncing. That's under the best circumstances. But what are some, if people are either women or trying to transition off of hormonal birth control and, not getting their period because they've been on it for a long time, or they've had their children and maybe want to not go back to the hormonal birth control, what are some other non-hormonal options? And then we'll talk more about perimenopause and menopause.
For sure. Yeah. So in my case, I just want to caveat too by saying, or just not caveat, but add to it by saying that if you are considering transitioning off hormonal birth control, you also, you don't have to look at it like this long-term thing. You could always go back if you want to, right? But if you want to take a break or you want to completely transition off of it, it's important to note that when it comes to the pill specifically, it depletes key nutrients that we need to ovulate, that we need to be thriving, that our hormones need. And some of those minerals include magnesium and vitamin C and the B vitamins and selenium, which is important for our thyroid. And so I always like to, when I'm helping my clients transition off, I always like to put them on a high quality prenatal, whether or not they're trying to conceive. Because if you have a good one, which unfortunately there's a lot of crap out there, so you have to find a good brand. I personally love WeNatal. But it has the optimal amounts of not only those vitamins and minerals that are depleted, but other essential vitamins and minerals that our hormones need to thrive that you're not going to find in a typical multivitamin. And so getting on a high quality prenatal, you may need to also add like a B complex on the side if you're not getting optimal amounts in the prenatal, which is incredibly important for progesterone production and energy. And then you want to make sure that you are eating a blood sugar balancing diet, that you're getting in enough protein, that you're reducing your stress, both from physical, emotional, some of the stressors that I talked about, you're eating enough. So that your body feels safe, so that when you come off the pill, you don't have this resurgence of symptoms that maybe you went on the pill to suppress in the first place. Because a majority of women are on the pill not just to prevent pregnancy, but they get put on it like your daughter, like, oh, we need to regulate your cycles, or, oh, you have extremely painful periods, like just go on the birth control pill, or you're depressed, like go on birth control. It's just this band-aid approach, or you have acne. That's a big one. And so if a lot of times, if you just go cold turkey, all of a sudden it's like the acne comes back with a vengeance, like the pain comes back, and then women are scared and they go right back on the pill. But if you can give yourself optimally like 3 months to replenish these nutrients, bring down stress, be eating blood sugar balancing meals, then when you transition off, it's going to be such an easier transition, and you're probably going to get your period back sooner. And so that's number one. Obviously, if you've already come off cold turkey and you're like, oh no, That's okay. You can still do these things afterwards, which are really going to support. But in terms of non-hormonal options, I wish that there were more really good options. Unfortunately, we've got the copper IUD, which works for some women. I've heard it work well for some women, but unfortunately, a lot of women get really bad cramping and heavier bleeding, and that it's really painful upon insertion. So I don't love that for many of those reasons.
Easier in women that have already been pregnant. It's somehow
Oh, I didn't
there's
know
some
that.
research into Paris versus nulli-Paris women who have not had a pregnancy who have had a pregnancy can tolerate the IUD more easily than women who have not.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
it is a good option, especially if obviously you don't want to get pregnant, you need another option. That's really great. But what I am a huge fan of is the fertility
yeah,
awareness method. And that, more specifically, the symptothermal method, because fertility awareness encompasses a bunch of different methods, and some of them are less accurate. This one, means that you are tracking your cycle, you are being aware, you're tracking symptoms, you're tracking your cervical fluid, which changes throughout the course of the month. It is more dry, and then it gets a little bit creamier, like hand lotion, as you start to approach ovulation. Then as you're really close to ovulation and you've got that peak fertility, it should become more abundant and clear and stretchy, and then gradually sort of dry up again as you get closer to your period. So watching for that is something that you have to track, and then also taking your basal body temperature. And fortunately now we have technology that makes all of this so much more easy. I personally, we were just talking about this off air, but I use the Aura Ring now, and they have a partnership with Natural Cycles where you can connect it to Natural Cycles app, and basically it takes your temperature throughout the whole night while you're sleeping. And then it connects it with Natural Cycles, which is another app for fertility awareness tracking. But instead of using a thermometer like you would do with the Natural Cycles app, you're using the Aura Ring, which for me, I sometimes I would like forget to take my temperature, and you need to take your temperature with a thermometer every morning, first thing before you get up. I wasn't as consistent as I should be. So the ring is really easy. And then it gives you an algorithm. After it has enough information, it'll take a while. And then eventually it will give you fertile and non-fertile days. Because upon ovulation, our temperature rises by about 0.5 to 1 degree. And that shows that we've already ovulated. The thing that you have to keep in mind is that there's a lot that can skew temperature readings. If you drank alcohol the night before, if you were traveling in different time zones, if you were sick, if you got up to pee too early, when you're using a thermometer, it's very sensitive. But still, even with the ring, those things can skew it. So you need to have at least 3 to 4 high temperature readings in a row to confirm. But the ring and Natural Cycles will create that algorithm for you. So it pinpoints ovulation. I feel like it's extremely accurate. And if you use the fertility awareness method and you use all of these things, it's up to 99.6% effective with perfect use, and then 98.4% effective with typical use. So it's extremely effective. And there's other ways, I know Oura Ring's a little bit expensive, but like Natural Cycles is a more affordable way of doing it. You just have to be consistent with your temperature reading in the morning. It comes with that thermometer, so you can just put it under your pillow or next to your bed. But all of the apps, you can track your symptoms easily within them. So that's what I do. And, it's user dependent. And that's the thing that people don't like, is they're like, ooh, like, what if I do it wrong? Or if I'm not consistent? And that is true. So I would say have a backup method, have a barrier method that you use for at least 2 months while you're getting comfortable with the fertility awareness method. And then once you've got it down, that's when you can, choose to come off of that, or you could just use the barrier method during your fertile week. So that's what I would suggest. It's extremely accurate. And honestly, it gets you just so much more in tune with your body and understanding the ebbs and flows. And I think that that's really empowering.
Yeah, I wish I would have known about this before, but we were talking offline about the Aura ring a little bit, and it is so sensitive temperature wise for me. So I still get my menstrual cycle very regularly. I mean, it's more regular than it was in my 20s and 30s. And it's
Amazing.
like I see the temperature drop and my periods there that day. And then like I know like mid-cycle, my breasts get kind of tender while I'm ovulating. And I'm like, that temperature is gonna shoot up any one of these days. And sure
Hmm.
enough, there it goes. And it stays elevated until I get my period again. So for me, it's very, very accurate. But like you said, it might take a while. And if your hormones are not as imbalanced as they could be, that could potentially be another thing to watch out for. But I know
Yep.
that's how they tracked ovulation prior to all this technology. It's just taking temperature in the morning, and it is super accurate. And thankfully,
Yeah.
I thank my husband all the time. Our youngest is now 15, but when we were through having children, he went and had surgery. My youngest was 6 weeks old, and
That's
I've been
fun.
able to just have, my natural hormones ever since then. And
Nice.
I'm forever grateful for that he went and endured that for a couple of weeks. So, but Candace, let's switch gears. But thank you for all of that information. That gives, I think it's a very empowering to be able to learn about your cycle and know all of the four phases that you mentioned. And I think it's really
Hmm.
empowering. And yeah, it can be, oh, well, what if I forget to do this? What if I do wrong? Yeah, you might feel like that for a while, but then you just get it and you know your body. And by the time you're
Yeah.
ready to have children, I mean, you're so far ahead of the game as far as knowing your hormones and all of those phases. So I love
Exactly.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about perimenopause and menopause for those of us who are, I've got to be in perimenopause. I mean, I'm in that age group, but so I know it's coming soon for me, like the downward slope of the hormones. But let's talk a little bit about perimenopause, like the symptoms of perimenopause, how you kind of know you're starting to transition away from, higher levels of hormones and regular hormones, and how you can, I don't want to say more easily, but how you can make those symptoms a little bit, I guess, easy, the transition a little bit easier from perimenopause to menopause and which symptoms to look for.
Okay, that's great. I'll get into that, but it helps me come back to a point I wanted to make um, to our previous discussion just now, because we started off with what to do when you stop the birth control, how to find natural alternatives. And I wanted to say in that there are many women who stop the birth control well, there's two things happening. There are those that stop and want because they want to get off synthetic hormones, and amen to that, and find the happier alternative, which the family awareness method, fertility awareness method is just, aren't we lucky that you gals have those trackers and the Oura ring? It's excellent. But for the women who are not looking now for contraception, they're looking to get off the pill because they're ready to have a child. And maybe they've been on the pill or on contraception for 15 years, and now they're ready. This is when all the things that Jesse talked about, getting you ready for a possible pregnancy. But in that gap, there should be a hormone test so that you can see. So take a while once you come off birth control to, wash out your system, give it 4 to 6 weeks. But this is where a woman who may be working towards perimenopause, because after all, perimenopause really is beginning now in the late, we see more and more. I was with CRT since the early 2000s. I've seen thousands of test results, and we see over the years the progression of perimenopausal fluctuations in hormone levels starts earlier. In fact, we started noticing it around 9/11, that stress levels were going up, and that was affecting estrogen and progesterone levels in women. And when that happens, you're starting to get into those fluctuations where stress hormones are running the show and inflammation. And so we've already seen over time, whereas perimenopause should have been right around mid 40s, that where your periods become erratic, your ovulation is erratic, it's all becoming erratic. You feel like you're on a roller coaster. That's how you know. And the first symptom, and it kind of surprises me how many women are not quite sure they're in perimenopause yet. And even when their periods become more irregular, they're still wondering, well, I had my period just 2 months ago. So it's hard to know that you're in perimenopause, but at any rate, in that period, even though hormones are fluctuating, and that's one of the times a typical standard old school doc will say, oh, there's no point in doing testing, hormone testing, because your hormones fluctuate. Yes, they do. They always fluctuate. But the point is there are healthy ranges that they should fluctuate within. So if we can see at perimenopause, or here you are, you're at 35, you haven't had a kid yet, you're kind of wondering, or you're going off at 30, anytime, wait a bit and then test those levels and make sure, especially if you're wanting to have a pregnancy, that you have enough progesterone being produced, that you're ovulating and making enough progesterone to support the pregnancy that you're hoping to have, because the progesterone, as Jessie mentioned, is key to taking a pregnancy to term, particularly within the first 12 weeks. It's crucial. It has everything to do with the implantation of the embryo. It's also called the pregnancy hormone, progestation. So testing in that way can be helpful. And and then for women in perimenopause who aren't necessarily, of course, women in perimenopause also have to use birth control or some form of it for a while. But at any rate, it's good to know what your hormone levels are, because even if you're not looking to get pregnant or looking for birth control anymore, you're still wanting to understand how your hormones are contributing to your symptoms. And that's what, so at perimenopause, there's all this uncertainty about whether or not you're in perimenopause, and it remains uncertain. Actually, it could if you didn't know, because officially you're not in menopause till it's been 12 months in a row without a period. So all the time up until that 12, when you hit that point and go, okay, it's been about 12 months. I'm around 52 years old. But up until that time, you've had months where you ovulated, months where you didn't, heavy cycles, light cycles, missing cycles, mood swings, hot, any one of a number of, things that feel like PMS, but aren't, that are worse, or, weight gain you never had. Perimenopause, first symptom, I'd say, if your period starts to change and it's not like clockwork anymore, that's your first clue. If your moods are changing, if your fuse is much shorter, you're just irritable. People say things, they look at you wrong, as my girls looked at me wrong in a restaurant one day, and I slammed my glass on the table and ran out of the whatever. They looked at me wrong. I mean, honestly, it can be that way. I think women can relate that I'm saying that. But when you note these symptoms, some women sound flummoxed by it. They'll say, I never had belly fat. I've never had this. I can lose weight anytime, and now I can't. And even though I'm now working out on the treadmill 6 days a week, I still can't lose it. Well, that's a good example of what women in perimenopause tend to do. They'll overtrain, start working out too much, create restrictive diets that are too severe, that lower, the production of the hormones they've still got there. We as we get older in perimenopause, you're trying to hang on to your hormones, and you don't want them to be, and it's not so much that they're diminishing, it is that they are fluctuating. So it becomes excessive at a certain point, estrogen becomes dominant, progesterone is low because you're not ovulating. So you start to have more symptoms of dominance, which is weight gain and bloating and feeling tearful. And then at the same time, because your hormones are fluctuating, you're feeling the effects of estrogen deficiency, where your nails are breaking and you're getting more wrinkles, or you're having vaginal dryness, hair dryness, all kinds of dryness. Your moods are, so you're actually, women in perimenopause are going through both phases. And at the same time, you've got your stress hormones in there, because they're working on the circadian rhythm and running, powering us through our day. And actually, the stress hormones are the adrenals trying to help mobilize our response to stress, so that we can take stress in stride throughout the day. and not build, a huge amount of belly fat and become, insulin resistant and pre-diabetic and all of the extremes of getting into a situation where stress is not controlled and is, creating hormonal havoc. We know with, the diets that create too much, the sugar and the high carb, simple carb diets that create spikes of blood sugar, which in turn create spikes of insulin resistance, which in turn promote the ovarian production of testosterone. I mean, there's a big link there between the way we eat, the way we, all these stress levels. So anyway, what was I saying? Help me come back to the point. This is a menopausal thing, but perimenopausal women really go through a lot of ups and
Yeah.
downs.
It's a wild, it's a wild ride, that's for sure.
It is Code's wild ride, and know that you can get a handle on it. I mean, Jesse can tell you when I finally at age 48 and was going through all those mood swings and got a handle on, I got my hormones tested. I knew it was my hormones, but and then it wasn't even normal to get your hormones tested. So found someone, learned that, oh my God, look at my cortisol levels, and I'm still drinking coffee 4 cups a day because I'm staying up too late at night because I'm trying to finish my work. It just gets into a thing. So I found that lifestyle changes, all the things we've talking about, and a little bit of progesterone in a bioidentical formulation made from plants, which is to help replenish the low levels that I had. Because why? Because I was 48 and I wasn't ovulating regularly anymore. And that's the case for women. Don't be in denial. You will go through perimenopause. You will be menopausal. This is inevitable. And women think they just, oh, I got through menopause. No, you never get through menopause. You're in menopause once you're there. And perimenopause is the transition to which can take 8 to 10 years. So if ever your body needed tender, loving attention, self-care, improved diet, getting a handle on insulin and blood sugar regulation, stress management, doing the things you love to do and not wasting any time not doing them. Now is the time. And the other point I would like to make before I get off my soapbox is just that the adrenal glands, which produce the cortisol response, they produce cortisol hormones, depend utterly on these good supply of progesterone. And when we're no longer ovulating, as Jesse mentioned, we only make progesterone for the most part upon ovulation. So here we are in perimenopause, we're not ovulating every reliable month. You can have a period and not ovulate. So we're not ovulating, we're not making progesterone that month. Our adrenals go wanting because they have to have progesterone to make cortisol. All these hormones are substrates, or they convert to provide the substance, they're precursors. So, and the fact is, as we women age and get into the perimenopause, menopause, our adrenals are trying to pick up the slack from ovaries that are now not delivering, they're not ovulating, they're on their way out, as I often say, packing their bags. It's not like they become defunct, but we cannot depend on ovarian hormone production for balanced levels of estrogen and progesterone or testosterone anymore. The ovaries make about a good percentage, 35 to 50% of testosterone. So we are not going to be having those. And that's where the argument for replenishment comes, because women don't live much past 50, didn't 100 years ago. Now we live to be 85, 90. We have another third of our lives to go. So when you hit menopause at 51, 52 on average, 12 months, that you're now in a place where you still have hormones in your body. They're adrenally produced for the most part. They're produced in fat cells. We pick them up in the environment, hopefully not the toxic ones. We get them from flaxseed and, good nutrients that have phytoestrogens. But the argument for testing and replacing also becomes really important. So hopefully I've just described perimenopause into menopause. It's not a seamless transition. It's a roller coaster, but it doesn't need to be, as I was going to say, Jess can tell you, when mom started using a little progesterone and changing her habits and not drinking so much coffee, and what else did I do? I don't know. I became more human, didn't I, at some point?
Yes. Yes. I mean, there was a lot of moments where she would slam the door because she worked from home, and,
I was
we
just
would,
saying how much better I was.
yeah, no, I was going to say though, I remember those becoming much less and
Okay.
not having the meltdowns and just being more, because at your heart, like, her character is very, I would say, you are calm and you do take stress in stride for the most part. And she's someone who you can come and talk to about anything. And so back then it didn't necessarily always feel that way. And I think, yeah, I think a huge change was the bioidentical progesterone cream. I think it was changing your diet. I think
Oh,
it was reducing stress, leaving certain job situations that didn't serve you. I think those were some of the main ones.
Yeah, and
mhm.
it's interesting because when we're going through perimenopause, and it can be 30s, 40s for the most part, for women, that's just a really stressful time, right? It's like we're at
Mm-hmm.
the peak of our careers a lot of times. We have children who are oftentimes still in the house or starting to leave the house. And
Yes.
physically, we're just not quite as resilient as we used to be, and our stress
Mm-hmm.
Aging
hormones are
parent.
probably taking a hit. I know mine, where I had my cortisol check a few years ago, and it had basically flatlined in the morning. I mean, it had gone from like spiking in the morning and, to just basically flatlining. So I had to take a step back too. I'm like,
Yeah.
I am very stressed out. And if I transition into menopause in this state, my adrenals are going to take an even
That.
bigger hit. And you talked about the blood sugar issues too. I mean, there's so many women who live a lifestyle similar to mine. And I would assume that you kind of live similarly to me, where I don't eat hardly any processed food. I eat higher protein, natural fats. I eat carbohydrates, but I use them strategically, and I use whole food
Mm-hmm.
carbohydrates. And it's like you're going through life, and I strength train. I'm not overdoing cardio by any means. And then all of a sudden, hemoglobin A1C is going up, fasting glucose is going up, fasting insulin is going up, and nothing has changed. And that can be super frustrating for women. And
Mm-hmm.
I've had other guests on here like, oh, what did you change as you were going through perimenopause and menopause? And they're like, well, the things that I changed that really move the needle, you're not going to want to hear. And they're usually removing alcohol, keep taking sugar out, or, being very cautious about sugar and processed foods, and, really just treating your body well and bringing that stress
Mm-hmm.
level down. I mean, there's no real way to get around it. So would you agree with those things for blood sugar? Because I mean, blood sugar and metabolic health can, once the estrogen falls, you can get in a world of hurt if you're not careful. And you can't eat and do the same things in your 40s and 50s and you do this in your 20s.
I just want
Yeah.
to chime in. It's not just about the estrogen, it's the progesterone that really goes missing once we're really truly not ovulating anymore. We get down to like 0 level of
Mhm.
progesterone, whereas we're still making some estrogen. I mean, you're right, it falls, but estrogen falls by like 45 to 50%, and we still make it in fat cells if we have surplus fat, and many of us do, let's face it. But it's the progesterone that can be so running on empty, and then that becomes the adrenals going without their precursor, and it is they who regulate the blood sugar insulin relationship, the adrenals. So if they don't have the fuel they need to do a proper job of regulating blood sugar and insulin, therein lies what you're just talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think to your point, Shanna, I'm a huge proponent of blood sugar balance. It's something that I really harp on in my one-on-one coaching, because women will come to me of all ages. I work with women in menopause too. A lot of women in perimenopause. I would say that's probably like the majority of my clients, but and they'll say like, I'm eating really healthy. Like, I eat whole foods,
Mhm.
I eat protein, I do grass-fed meat, all the things. And I don't understand why I'm dealing with all these symptoms. I can't lose weight. And I have them track their foods. And when I look at it, I see they're usually eating like 50% of the protein that they need.
Mhm.
B, they're having a lot of naked carbohydrate. So sure, a banana is healthy, quote unquote, but if you're eating a banana by itself, a couple hours after you've had lunch, that's going to spike your blood sugar levels. That's going to spike your insulin, and you're going to for sure have a crash later on. And then the more that you do that, it doesn't have to just be that you're eating a bunch of like packaged processed carbohydrates or foods. It can be not pairing your foods in the right way. So simple hacks, like I always just say, dress up your naked carbs. So instead of having them naked, dress them up, pair it with protein. If you're going to have that banana, have a protein shake on the side with it. Have a few sips of the protein shake first before you bite into the carbohydrate. Before meals, maybe have a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar to help with your blood sugar balance. Eat, if you can, I know it's not always possible, but eat a couple bites of the protein and the fat first with your fiber, because that's really what's going to help to slow the absorption of those carbohydrates. And then have the carbohydrates. So let's say you made a rice bowl, you'd have maybe the rice on the bottom, and then you would have like your veggies, and then you would have maybe some avocado and some chicken. Eat the chicken and the avocado and the veggies first, and then, have the rice be at the base. And doing that, not only will you better stabilize your blood sugar levels, but you'll be more satiated sooner. So you may find that you don't need to eat the whole bowl of rice, or even just little things where it's like, I love to do a half a cup of rice and a cup and a half of cauliflower rice and mix them together, because it's like more volume and it feels way more filling with the fiber, but I'm still getting those carbs. I'm just better balancing it. So, and everybody has a unique carb threshold. So it's also finding what that is for you. Some people can handle a lot more carbohydrates and other people can't. So, wearing a continuous glucose monitor and things like that can help you, but also just taking note of how you feel after you eat a meal. Like, are you recharged and energized after a meal, or do you want to take a nap? I mean, there's a lot of other signs too, but I think just teaching that optimal way of building a bowl or a plate is super, super helpful.
Yeah, we talk a lot about those exact hacks. And
Oh, cool.
so those are all great points and things to remember for sure. And the carbohydrate threshold, I mean, that's just another, it's so valuable to wear a continuous glucose monitor and kind of know what your threshold is. I mean, obviously there's different foods. Like I've worn a CGM many, many times, and I've told my listeners, like, cherries are one of my favorite foods, and I eat 6 of them, and it's like my blood sugar is going 40 to 50 points. I'm like, what? It's just
Yeah.
cherries. Like, I love them. And even if I've eaten them after protein and fat, it doesn't matter. So I have to just be really
Yeah.
like, it's just something I know. It's knowledge. It doesn't mean I'm never going to eat a cherry again, but it's just knowledge for me. But I also have found with my CGM that my threshold's right around 30 grams of carb per meal, like in any one setting. So, because I've always been a little bit more carbohydrate intolerant. Like my
Okay.
whole dad's family is like type 2 diabetic and heart disease. And so I know for me, like I don't shy away from eating all carbohydrates. I just like I have to keep them limited. I still enjoy them, but I know my threshold's around that 30 grams. And if I go above that, I'm gonna have a blood sugar spike. And I'm okay with that. But it's like you have to know that, and you have to know that about yourself and things. And I didn't start wearing a CGM until I was in my 40s. So maybe when I was in my 20s and 30s, my threshold was very different. I don't know. But at least I know now about that about myself. So one more
Yeah.
question for each of you, and then we'll close out here. Anything else that you wanted to mention about the cycle syncing that, getting that on track that we didn't talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I
Well,
know that's a big topic that you talk about.
I was going to say, if you ever want to do a part 2, we could do a whole one on cycle syncing. I've done like full episodes on it because there's a lot to chat about. And I think that there's a lot out there on cycle syncing that overwhelms people, where it's like, oh my gosh, how do I remember like these foods to eat and these exercises and these supplements? But just a few key things that I like to remind women of, and you sparked that in me when you were talking about the blood sugar balance, is during the second half of the cycle, we become more insulin resistant. And during the first half of the menstrual cycle, we're more insulin sensitive. So that's one area where obviously you want to learn your unique threshold, but it's really, really imperative, especially the week before your period, to be very intentional about pairing your carbs with protein and fats. and just like really honing in on how you feel during that week. Because and also progesterone, as it's produced upon ovulation, it's a thermogenic hormone. So it heats up the body and it actually increases our metabolism. So you'll find that you probably feel a little bit hungrier during that luteal phase. And a lot of women will try to repress that hunger and they'll be like, oh, you just need to have willpower and drink water or whatever it is, but you may actually need to add a couple hundred extra calories to your day. Ideally, it would be through a protein rich snack or having more protein at every meal. A lot of times people ask, like, how do I get in more protein? And it doesn't have to be complicated. Instead of 2 ounces of turkey meat, do 4, or instead of 2 eggs, have 2 eggs and egg whites. Like, you can just increase the amount of protein. So that's what I would say is have it come from protein, because protein is the most satiating macronutrient and it's going to help offset that more insulin resistant time in our cycle. And then during the follicular and the ovulatory phases, our metabolism actually slows down a little bit. So while we are more insulin sensitive, because our metabolism slows down a little bit, we actually do much better with being in a caloric deficit during those 2 phases. So if you are somebody who's wanting to lose weight, those phases are a good time to focus more on like a fast or a cleanse or something like that. Obviously, you don't want to go extreme with it, but then I usually say during the luteal phase, if you can, maybe come out of a calorie deficit and focus more on maintaining and building muscle. Because you can sort of periodize your nutrition and your workouts based on where you are in your menstrual cycle. And then one other point I wanted to make is that our resting cortisol levels are naturally higher during the second half of the menstrual cycle and the luteal phase. So we're less resilient to stress. We're less resilient to things like doing a cleanse or cutting calories or having a lot of caffeine or late nights out, changing time zones, sugar, alcohol. So we really want to be mindful of all of those things, because if we're not, that's going to increase our symptoms. It's going to make our boobs more painful. It's going to make breakouts worse. It's going to make us more fatigued, cramps worse, bloating worse. So really trying to offset that. And then during that follicular and ovulatory phase, we're more resilient to stress because our resting cortisol levels are naturally lower. So we can get away with a little bit more of like, if we want to do a little cleanse or we want to stay up a little bit later or have a couple glasses of wine. I'm not saying to overdo it. But that's also the phase where like your body can handle some more cardio, couple days of HIIT training, whereas the week before our periods, really just focusing on more restorative movement. And we can do strength training throughout our whole cycle because it's very hormone supportive, helps us to build and maintain lean muscle, helps to prevent osteoporosis as we age, increases healthy levels of testosterone. But you can modify your strength training based on where you are at in your cycle. You can go a little bit lighter with your weights during the premenstrual week. You can lift heavier during like the follicular and ovulatory phases. So I oftentimes with cycle syncing, I hear like, oh, just do yoga and stretch during your period week. But a lot of women feel really great during their period week after the first couple days. Or, I hear like, oh, just do yoga and stretch like from the premenstrual week through your period. But that's like 2 weeks out of every month that you're just not going to be strength training. And that's not going to be very supportive for your goals. And so I think you could do strength training all month long, but just modify how you do it and listen to your body.
I think those are all fabulous points that I wish I would have known 30 years ago.
I wish I would have known them a long time ago too.
Yeah. And I do see that with strength training in my own, like sometimes I always go to a strength class and I'll be in the middle class like, gosh, these weights seem so heavy today. I'm like, oh yeah, because I just ovulated last week. So you do see it. But yes, I'm glad that you say to just keep strength training throughout, because I believe the same thing. I mean, not that we want to be doing it every single day, but just not feeling like you can't do anything leading up to the start of your period too. And everybody's just different with their energy levels. So those are all beautiful points. Well, as we close out, I know a lot of women listening are coming to know the benefits of bioidentical hormone replacement with the plants. And I mean, even regular hormone replacement therapy. I think women are starting to know that A lot of the studies that we were maybe exposed to and were brought to light many, many years ago weren't completely accurate. And they're just knowing, well, I don't have to go through menopause, like you said, like feeling all dried out and gaining weight and going through all of, these, yelling at my kids and having hot flashes. So Candace, I would love to ask you, like, what's the best way to test your hormones? And then your quick thoughts on, the bioidenticals, hormone replacement or replenishment, I guess we should call it.
Right. I like the word replenishment because really that's what we're doing, because we're using, when women use hormones, it's Goldilocks amounts. So it's not too much, not too little, but just right based on your physiology and and your test results. And test results, we're in the saliva testing camp. I was, the lab I talked about was that I was with, the testing we use, ZRT, has always been started in saliva, which was at the time a very underused testing modality, but had been used in the military to test DNA. It's been the gold standard of cortisol stress hormone testing because saliva is non-invasive. You're not using a needle, and saliva has a circadian rhythm of morning, noon, evening, bedtime. And we wanted to be able to track that. So who's going to get a blood draw 4 times in one day? It's always been the gold standard, but Dr. Zava decided to start testing the other hormones in saliva and create the whole picture. So, and what's good about saliva is not only that it's non-invasive, because for many people, needles induce stress. So that's not going to help us get a fair test result. So non-invasive, convenient, the timing is so important. You do want to test at a certain point in your cycle if you're still having cycles. You do want to test morning, noon, evening. So optimal privacy, convenience at home. But the main big thing is that saliva is measuring hormone levels that have left the bloodstream. So quick physiology, hormones are carried on a red blood cell in the red bloodstream, which is your reservoir of hormone, but we're only using 2 to 4%, a fraction of those total hormone levels on, throughout the day. The neurotransmitters are signaling to us, she's going for a workout. We need to release some testosterone. So testosterone will be released to support your strength training that afternoon, support your muscles and your strength and stamina. But it'll be fractionated, and we can capture that en route hormone in saliva, in the salivary gland. It's escaped its binding protein in the bloodstream. It's on its way to the target tissues of the body, where we talk about receptor sites, and hormones bind to a receptor site. Think of a puzzle piece. They fit perfectly, and they evoke a response that governs our mental, physical, emotional lives, really. I always say hormones rule. So saliva testing is actually a cheap and cheerful and very accurate way to look at, and convenient way to look at the hormonal picture of hormones in action. Not bound up hormones, but hormones in action, and hormones that are then going to give you levels within ranges that have been established that can tell you, is this low? Is this high? Is this fluctuating? Is this related? And then we'll match up the symptoms. So matching symptoms with levels is another kind of revelation of this sort of testing, because you're looking at active levels. You can identify problems. You can't do that when you're testing total levels. So we're testing free, bioavailable levels. That's why saliva for me is it's just the mainstay. Some blood tests have their place. We can test in certain things, have to be tested in blood, which should be, in terms of trying to figure out more about what's going on, i.e. fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, high sensitivity CRP, all the things around, ferritin, the things we want to look at, that's all in blood. We can do blood spot through ZRT, but the saliva test is the mainstay of the hormonal milieu, giving you the big picture. And then if hormonal test results and your age and your reported symptoms, and perhaps a conversation with me or Jess or one of us who consult indicates that, this lady could really benefit at 48, you know, her children are running down the hall screaming. She could benefit from a little bit of hormone replenishment at this amount in this delivery system, which is generally topical, or we work with affiliated doctors who can provide a high quality FDA approved hormone that doesn't have to be prescribed. Not every woman in the world is living near a compounding pharmacy or a functional medicine doctor. And we have to deal with the reality of old school or traditional doctors who literally haven't had this training. It's not always down to their opposition. It may be down to a lack of training. So what we're trying to do at Your Hormone Balance with our testing is to be able to identify imbalances, link them up with symptoms, help you find your next steps. If you need bioidentical hormones, that's part of this whole picture that Jessie has so beautifully outlined of, you know, the holistic picture. And all of that is in our guide because this is a holistic thing. You can't out supplement a stressful lifestyle or a horrible diet. There's nothing you can take that's going to change where you're coming from. If you're staying up, drinking too late, getting up in the morning, having too much coffee, pushing yourself through the day with sweets. And people know what they're doing. But anyway, that's where it's at. Bioidenticals are plant-based, derived from only natural substances. So they're not as readily available as big pharma with its patented. And that's why we don't have them insured yet, which is a shame. But you can't patent a natural substance, but you can buy natural progesterone. Transitions for Health is in Whole Foods. We have a great product that we like, that we feel very confident and safe with. And there are many forms of progesterone in oils, in topicals. There are adaptogens. We talk about all of this. And, the point being, balance is attainable. But when you think about the adrenal glands the adrenals and insulin resistance, which is your topic, and then the connection with PCOS is just crucial. And understanding what your hormones are doing and how, you say empowering. Being empowered means you have the knowledge now to ask the right questions. You have the knowledge to come at this from a sense of control, and the questions that you have for your coach, your doctor, your provider, wherever you may be, and get the answers that you need.
Yeah. Well, tell us where we can work with you. We've got the broad spectrum. We got people,
Jess can run
we've
the symptom quiz on our website, and Jess take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to start with taking a symptom quiz to see if your symptoms could be related to hormone imbalance, you can go to www.yourhormonebalance.com and just click the quiz at the top. If you're interested in actually testing your hormones and getting to the root of these imbalances, and you want a deeper dive, you can find on that website our new test kit. It's called the Rebalance Rescue Test Kit, and it includes saliva testing, plus a recap of test results with relevant education to help you understand your results, and then the best natural rebalancing next steps. And then from there, if you want more customization, we offer a custom guide that really details your unique results and recommendations based on them, and or a consultation with my mom, who can, as you can tell, is very passionate and can do a deep dive into your results with you. And we created the code FASTER50 for $50 off that package for your listeners. So that's there for them. And then if you are somebody who's like, okay, I really want to learn more about how to lose weight sustainably, cycle syncing, working with a coach one-on-one, you can go to bodyblissbyjess.net and apply for a free discovery call with me. I do online coaching, so I can create custom meal plans, hormone supportive strength training workouts. I do educational videos on a variety of topics, as well as unlimited support. And then we're at Your Hormone Balance on Instagram and Body Bliss by Jess on Instagram. And we provide just a lot of educational content on both of those platforms.
Well, thank you. We will make sure to link all of that in the show notes. And I think we hit the gamut of younger generation to middle age to older generation today. So we have this episode was really packed with some really great information. So I thank both of you for coming on today and all the work that you're doing for women especially, but it branches out to everybody. So happier moms, grandmas,
Yeah.
everybody's happier, right?
Yeah.
So it's beautiful. Thanks for all the work you're doing.
Thank you for having us on. This was really fun.
It was a pleasure.